Welcome back to the Triangle and Two podcast. I'm Brian Murphy with WRAL, joined once again, as I am every week, by Bryn Renner, former UNC quarterback, former NFL quarterback. And Bryn, we're here to discuss Carolina's 20-15 victory over Stanford. Felt like we're kind of seeing the same movie over and over again. Defense played outstanding. Offense took a while to get going. And then, like most Carolina games, this one had a little drama at the end. Once again, Stanford scored two late touchdowns, had a chance with an onside kick, got the ball back at the end of the game. But again, Melkart Jaude, I've been working on that name a lot because he's being called a lot. Melkart Jaude with a big sack on the final drive. He's got 9 sacks this year. The defensive line is really the star of this team.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, you hit the nail on the head with there. I think the defense is really playing defense and offense. And, I really mean that because they're flipping the field and giving the offense, easy possessions, right? So, you look at the first turnover they forced, it was the fumble on the strip sack, and they get the ball at the 6-yard line, ended up not getting 7 points, but get 3. And then Kamari House it's a huge interception late in the second half, and really kind of gives the Carolina offense a really good field position, and which they didn't have the entire game. I thought both teams were playing similar style football, Brian. It was NFL football, run, try to convert a third down, and if you don't, punt it away. And it was like the first half was an hour and 4 minutes. And Jones, Angel, and I, when we were calling the game, we looked at each other and I'm like, that was the quickest half has ever happened. And you saw similarities of the Syracuse first half and the Stanford first half really come to light, which was defense plays exceptional, tries to give the offense enough possessions to go score. Offense isn't not really executing. I think we had, I think under 50 yards or right around 50 yards in the first half total.
47 yards in the first half for the Carolina offense. Just, and you had 2 NFL coaches, Frank Reich, Bill Belichick. So it did feel very much like the Panthers against the 49ers and not necessarily a Stanford versus UNC game.
Yeah, exactly. And then you look at, what the offense did in the second half, which was really productive. It's something that is what Coach Belichick talked in his post-game press conference. It's the inconsistencies from kind of both sides. You see it at one point of the game and really not clicking in all cylinders to be as successful as they want to be. So I really think it was a really good win, but there's still things and still question marks, especially on the offensive side, that I have.
As a quarterback, you obviously studied defenses your whole life. What is Carolina doing along that defensive front? It doesn't look like they're bringing a ton of pressure. What are they doing along the defensive front to get so much pressure? That's 19 sacks over the last 3 games. They had 9 against Stanford. Obviously, starting a freshman quarterback probably held the ball a little too long at some times, but they had 10 in the last 2 weeks. I mean, this has been consistent now for about the good part of a month. What are they doing up front that's really creating problems for opposing offense?
Yeah, Brian, a quarterback's nightmare is when you can get enough penetration with 4 pass rushers, because then they can play pretty much any coverage they want on the back end and be successful. And what you're seeing from Melkart and Tyler Thompson is a speed rusher from the field side. So when I say that, when a field pass rusher with some speed really wants to generate and get upfield, and the power rusher wants to get underneath, and you're seeing that combo really come to light. I think it was, they both had 3 sacks in the game, which is incredibly impressive. We haven't seen a defense like this, Brian, in my opinion, in a really long time, maybe since the early Mac Brown days in 1997. I think that was a heyday of defense. And these guys, from a quarterback's perspective, can apply pressure really, really quick. I mean, I think Elijah Brown, especially in the first half, was getting out the ball in maybe a second and a half, if that. And they were getting back there really, really fast. And when you can do that, it really puts a quarterback in a bind. And you have to get the ball out. I'll never forget, we played Jadavion Clowney and that South Carolina defense the first game of when he was coming on his Heisman tour after he hit the kid from Michigan. And we were very. It felt like I just didn't have much time, and they were only rushing 4, and that's really tough to prepare for if you're an offense. And you've seen that the last 2 weeks of Syracuse and Stanford, especially in the passing game, really struggling to get the ball off on time. But this defense is incredible. And I want to give a shout out to the secondary. I think they're playing a lot better man-to-man defense, and we've talked about that the last 3 weeks. And that whole defense is really playing well right now.
Yeah, the defense set them up, as you mentioned, 2 great field positions. They got 6 points out of it. Offensively, what changes in the second half? I think one thing that fans are looking at is like, look, Damon June had a monster game against Syracuse, and now all of a sudden he gets 3 carries. it's kind of what Belichick did in the pros. You never could trust if you're a fantasy football player, never could trust a running back for New England because you never knew who it was going to be. But and obviously Davion Goss had a nice second half, particularly in the pass catching that kind of opened the door for Carolina a little bit. But what is changing from the first half to the second half, and how can they bottle that up and do it in the first half?
Yeah, I think if you got look at this offense as a whole, they get off to a really slow start, and then the second half they kind of try to come alive. And there was two plays in particular, Brian, that they scored off of that really changed the game. It was the 3rd and 12, going into the end zone, I think around the 20 or 30 yard line, where Goss caught the ball on man to man. They brought cover zero, and he beat him, and there was a back shoulder throw. And honestly, it was a great throw by Gio. And he had two of those, and then he has the one to Ship that actually ends up winning the game on a cover zero blitz. They brought everybody. So two plays were cover zero, bring in the house. He takes a 5-step drop, hits his back foot, and hits two guys. But other than that, Brian, it kind of was a stagnant offense. I believe they averaged 1.9 yards a rush, and it was around 50 yards for the entire game. I think that was it. And when you can't run the ball, and Belichick said this in the pregame, he said that they were really good at stopping the run, which they did, and that we were going to have to make plays in the passing game. And we were the team that did it. And I think it came down to Gio making those two plays. And that's kind of exactly on paper what you thought the game was going to be. But speaking on, just kind of the offense as a whole, I think we kind of get out of schedule and we get off schedule. I want to go back to the drive they had at the 6-yard line. We tried to run quarterback sweep with Gio -2 yards. We tried to throw it to Jake Johnson. Gio misses high. And then we try to pass it again on 3rd down, and we throw it away. And I'm like, we didn't run the ball once, and June didn't touch the ball. And so it's really kind of a confusing type of situation for this offense when the kid had 15 touches all purpose, 182 yards all purpose, and 2 touchdowns and wins you the game. And then, he doesn't get many carries. But I think you got to see this offense. Gio eventually was 18 of 25 for 203 and 2 touchdowns. And those 2 touchdowns were on critical plays. So he's making critical plays to win, but it's the consistency over 4 quarters that we're not seeing.
Yeah, the throw, the little wheel route to Goss, again to the left, and we've talked about the difference between him being able to go left and right, was beautiful pass. And he talked about after the game, the throw to Ship against an all-out blitz is a throw he wouldn't have felt confident making it against TCU, but has built the trust and a rapport with Jordan Ship, and then Ship did all the rest, right? He broke tackle and outran everybody to the end zone. But that consistency, the turnover to me was another big thing. A bad fumble. He's just turned the ball over too many times for if you're going to play this conservatively on offense and rely on your defense, and you can't turn the ball over. And I'm not trying to crush Gio here, but it's just, in order, I think, for Carolina to get to kind of that next level, they only scored 20 points again in this game. It seems like that's the position. Again, not trying to kill Gio, but if your quarterback can't get to a higher level, then you're going to be limited in what you can do offensively.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you look at this offense, it's got to run through Gio. And I think that's just part of the position and part of what we have now. If we want to be successful and score more points with these next 3 opponents that are playing really good football coming up, it's going to have to be, he's going to have to execute at a high level. And I think he knows that. And I think he wants to. And I think, we're not, I wouldn't say we're crushing him, but I think he's just got to understand the role and responsibility of playing the position. And I think he's made critical plays. I think he's done a really good job of, like the throw to Ship is a really good throw. The throw to Goss is a really good throw. He made really good throws, but he missed some deep shots too that went out high and out of bounds. And I think he's going to fix that. And it takes time. Like I said, I'm being overly critical of a quarterback, but it's noticeable on film when you watch it again. And I think he's going to step up and do that. And I think the offense needs to do that, especially with the games coming up. So we're going to have to see a little bit more consistent play, but they struggled to run the ball, and it was the team that was going to make plays in the passing game that won it. And ultimately we did that.
Coming up, Wake Forest, Duke, NC State to finish the season. Carolina needs 2 wins to get bowl eligible. You didn't play under Mac. So you played for, Butch Davis and Larry Fedora, kind of what I would call outsiders to the program.
Yeah.
Or even outsiders to North Carolina. How big of a deal did they make these in-state games? Because already saw in the locker room Belichick talking about, in-state, we got 3 in-state, don't leave the state of North Carolina. And obviously Mac 1.0, made the state championship a huge deal. When you were a player, how much did these in-state game matters, especially I would gotta imagine Duke and NC State.
Yeah, it was playoff time. So everyone's played high school football or played in a rivalry game, and we treated every single one of those games that was a state game. ECU, Wake, Duke. They didn't care if it's Elon. It was the biggest and it was the biggest, most important game. And if in our team room it has the state and it has all the states that have a state school. So all North Carolina state schools are on it. And if we're playing that team, it mattered more than anything. Just we it was overhyped, and it was the biggest, most important game of the year. And I think for Butch and Larry, when I was with them, it was more important for the recruiting purpose. It was, let's own the state and really take it over, because it's a cool thing that we have that most states don't have, is you have so many schools around your area in the triangle. So these games are really important, but they almost were treated, they got to treat these games like playoff games. They really do. And it has to mean something to everybody in the locker room. And I think for us, and now it's different with the transfer portal, but we had a lot of kids that knew the players on other teams because they either played with them in high school or played against them. So it was really personal. And I always loved what Butch did, is he had a kid stand up, before the game the night before on Friday nights. And if he knew the opponent, got recruited by the coach, or he said why the game meant so much to him, like the kids from Winston-Salem would get up, and everybody from that state or from that city would say, this means a lot to me. And you felt the energy, and practice was different, and you practiced harder. It meant more. And I never forget what Larry did when we played NC State, is he took paint and had Party City come in, and everything was red when we got to the locker room on Sunday to watch film. And it pissed everybody off. And it was like the most motivating thing. And we ended up, Gio ran the punt back on the final play, which is one of the greatest plays in Keenan history, in my opinion. And we hadn't beat him for 5 years. So little things like that to gain motivation really help in meaningful games like this. And we're going to have it the rest of the way.
Let's end with a little talk about the conference wide. Certainly
Mhm.
not getting very much respect from the CFP. There are 5 teams ranked in the top 25. Unfortunately for the ACC, they're all 14 through 23 at this point. It
Mhm.
does seem like the league just doesn't have that dominant team. It doesn't have a Clemson. Miami's fallen off the last couple of weeks. Even Georgia Tech with the loss at NC State. When you play in a league, and Belichick mentioned it, every game in this conference seems to come down to the last play. That was true UNC against Cal, UNC against Virginia, UNC against Stanford to some degree as
Mhm.
well. It just doesn't seem like there's a ton of margin or a ton of separation when you play these league games.
I think you're exactly right. I think it's just the ACC is just such, it's almost an over spoken about thing when all the other conferences are beating themselves up too. But if it's like the ACC beats himself up, we're not allowed to do that. We don't have a very good, amount of depth from top to bottom. But I think that's incorrect. I think it's always kind of been like that. There's never been, besides Clemson for the last couple of years, there's never been a really dominant team. And this year you're seeing the parity. You're seeing the transfer portal effect and teams getting hot late. And I think, NC State's one of those teams that always gets hot in November. I think you see a team like Duke that, coming off a tough loss is going to be more motivated to play. And you're going to see Miami kind of try to sneak into that playoff run. But it's a really competitive league. And I think that's what is really cool, is there's not a runaway type of team this year. Florida State was projected, Miami was projected, and they're all kind of balancing each other out. And, Georgia Tech lost to UVA, or excuse me, Georgia Tech lost to NC State. And so you're seeing the parity kind of come out, especially when it gets to playoff time. And I think it's enjoyable to watch. And these kids are playing really hard in the league.
As a player, when it's kind of level like that, every week you kind of have a chance to win, but you also have a chance to lose.
Hmm.
Does that change the way you prepare, as opposed to like when you play an FCS team, or when you play a team that's favored against you by like 40 points? You're like, man, the chance of us winning this game is actually kind of low. It seems like across the board, you can win any game, you can lose any.
Yeah, and Brian, that's a great point. I never really thought about it like that. But every game in the ACC, I never really thought that the other team was that much better than us. I wouldn't say, because we were always trying to be competitive. Because I think that's what makes the league great. It wasn't like, the old Vanderbilt was playing the Alabama, and that's the old Vandy, right? It was kind of like, okay, well, it's not really a chance. It might be close in the first quarter, and then they're going to run away with it. In our league in the ACC, you don't really have that, and I never really approached it like that, because you watch tape and you kind of have this mindset where any week a team could beat the other team. And I think that's what's really cool about the league. And my approach was always the same. And I had really good coaches to kind of get your mindset where either you were playing a lesser opponent, or a bigger opponent. Never really came to that. It was like, hey, let's just do our jobs and do what we can do. And I think that's the coolest thing about our league is every week is a really good matchup, and it comes down to the fourth quarter. I mean, every game this year has been extremely tight, a lot of overtimes. I just speaking on Carolina, two games that come down to an inch or a fumble, and so it's really come down to the fourth quarter, which is really exciting to watch.
I imagine these last three games are going to come down to the end as well. Last one, I'll leave you with this. I don't know how much you got to watch of Belichick's post game press conference, but he
Mhm.
spoke for 27 minutes. It was, the PR guy said, "Hey, that's the last question," and then Belichick said, "I'll take some more," and seemed to give some introspection into like, "Hey, if we knew then what we know now, we might have done some things differently. We're still messing with combinations." It gave a great answer, I thought, on the why they do those development practices and the
Mhm.
success they've had with that. Just felt like maybe it was because they won the game, but just he seemed to feel more comfortable getting a little deeper into some of his thought process.
I think it's a great thing to see from him because I think it's you're 9 weeks in and you kind of know who this team is, and you finally figured out what the formula is to win. And I think for him, he's such a good coach in that area of finding the formula for this team. And he knows it now. And you could see it in his answers. It was like, okay, I know exactly what the formula is for this team to win. And I think something that doesn't go noticed is how many young players that were playing, especially on the offensive line and defensive line. Like they are coming into their own, and you're seeing the progress of coaching. I think he's done a really good job, especially with the defense, of bringing those guys along. The pass rush, the defensive line is phenomenal, and he's kind of at this point where he's excited to go see these guys play for the next 3 weeks because he knows the formula that they have to win. And that's what it is. And he's seen production the last 2 weeks, and it's great to hear his kind of introspective of what this team is, the consistency he spoke about, and lack thereof, and he's kind of just feeling this game, this team, and seeing the results and saying, "Hey, look, this is who we are. This is who we're going to be, and we really got to play well the next 3 weeks to have a chance."
He's Bryn Renner. I'm Brian Murphy. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for listening on the Triangle of Two podcast here at WRAL. And we'll talk next week after Carolina plays Wake Forest, a key game. They really need this one if they're going to get bowl eligible with two tough games with Duke and NC State to end the season. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.